we have author Scott Kenemore. A graduate of Kenyon College and Columbia University, Scott lives in Evanston, Illinois, where when he's not writing, you might find him behind the drum kit with his band, The Blisters. He is the author of 6 novels, including his latest from Skyhorse Publishing, Lake of Darkness, which has received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. Well, welcome Scott Kenemore to the show.
Hey, how are you? Brother.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Nice.
Absolutely. First, to start us off, let's get the elevator pitch of Lake of Darkness. What's the essence of the story and the characters?
Okay. So it is about a detective trying to catch a decapitationist operating on the south side of Chicago 100 years ago. And it's based in neighborhoods where I worked in community development for many years, specifically sort of fighting the legacy of redlining and unfair housing in Chicago. And I wanted to sort of do a cosmic horror tale, but that would be about what it was like for specifically African-American cops on the South Side during World War I, because it was a fascinating and vice-riddled world where I wanted to set this story.
Chicago Vice? What?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to actually touch on your community development background, but and what led you to that. But what's really interesting to me is that the themes that you're covering, from 100 years ago, are echoing right now, probably as loudly as ever in that scene. So.
Right.
Well, a main character in my novel is Big Bill Thompson, a historical figure with which I'm fairly obsessed, and so he was mayor of Chicago during World War I, and when our current president was elected, a lot of people said the only figure like him in American history that we've ever seen before is probably Big Bill Thompson, because he sort of had one foot in the sort of like pioneer Wild West Al Swearingen sort of world that was still going on in the late 1800s, early 20th century, and then he also, I think, was a pioneer in sort of being a contemporary politician in the way he knew how to slice and dice constituencies within the city in order to keep himself in power and to appeal in a very calculated way to certain demographics. And just like a fascinating scoundrel who you want to have in a novel about a decapitationist.
A decapitationist is it do I have to look that up in the dictionary?
I know what it is. It's a subcategory of medicine, believe me.
I think I made up that word because I've been using it, and Microsoft Word does not recognize it. And,
red line
it every time, but I continue to. I'm going to will it into existence. So,
or you're a trendsetter.
Decapitations. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Two decapitations. I'll drink to that. There you go.
Am I up, Shawnee?
Yes, sir.
So what sources did you lean on? Where did you go to for your research? Chicago was very rich, and I lived in Chicago for almost 20 years.
What neighborhood?
Oh, anywhere from Palatine to Schaumburg to Elgin,
Sure.
to all the way down. And I finished out in Naperville and did school in Chicago area.
Sure.
So I'm pretty familiar with your area. So I know the rich history behind it. But where did you go for that information, a century or more ago?
Yeah, sure. So I was boots on the ground in some of Chicago's neighborhoods that are now sort of like known as like the South Side. So like Auburn, Gresham, South Shore, Chatham, places like that. But when you work in community development, especially around housing, you learn the histories of buildings, and it's impossible, I think, not to be intrigued by like this was a Russian bathhouse in the late 1800s. This was a Jewish community center. This was like how did these neighborhoods change, and what was the history here? So I was just sort of led to reading about these neighborhoods. I would say I drew on the Went and Kogan books. Went and Kogan were a pair of reporters, one for the Sun-Times, one for the Tribune, and they wrote a series of history books about Chicago that are just about all excellent. And then I also read a lot of work by a contemporary historian named Timuel Black, who I just love. He had a book come out last year when he was 100 years old. So like hashtag writer goals. I'm so in awe of him. Very, very nice guy. I think he's 101 now, still around. But he has this whole series of history books the series is called Bridges of Memory, but it's interviews he did with people who made the Great Migration to Chicago in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and just building on that and learning how that influenced and changed just like the course of the city to today. Just really made me excited about I want to set a story in this neighborhood. And the temptation is to want to include almost too many like cute factoids.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
The info dump. Yeah.
Sort of things you learn along the way, because it's so interesting.
So I'm a student of history, and it sounds like you are in particular with the research you did into this story. You just talked about all these cool facts that were coming at you, and you want to put all that stuff into the story. But what was the most interesting, or the most that pulled at you fact as you were going through all your research that made it into the novel?
Sure. Well, so my hero is a police officer, and I think as a resident, you moved to Chicago. I've lived here about 14, 15 years. You have the sense that the Chicago police force was very progressive. So they've had African American officers since like essentially right after the Civil War. They were a leader in hiring police matrons who were sort of like proto female police officers. And historians think that Chicago probably hired the first Black female police officer in the United States in around 1913. So you think, oh, wow, very progressive city. Like, we're a leader. But you scratch that surface, you dig a little deeper, and you learn that, in the time in which my novel is set, for example, like Black officers didn't even get uniforms initially. It was just, here's a badge and a gun, keep things quiet in your side of town. And yet there were all these sort of, I would call them like civil rights inflection points where like things change a little bit. And it's like, okay, now we're going to let Black officers patrol in white neighborhoods. Now we're going to let Black officers have white partners. And just like, there are all these private moments of change and inflection that were really important in the history of the police department, back beyond 100 years. And so I wanted to write about that too. And I like stories that are set in sort of times of change. So that was an example of something I learned, that I was like, the challenges that a Black officer would have catching a serial decapitationist 100 years ago are very different than officers would have today.
Hey, Scott, I'm curious. Did you find that those inflection points, were they forced by like the political apparatus of Chicago, like the mayor, or did it come from like an upswell of the community or the police department? Like where did that come from?
Yeah, so I would not say I've read about specific mayors who are like, I'm here to change things. But I will say that Chicago has a very strong city council. For some reason, we call them aldermen instead of city councilmen in Chicago. Yeah. But the aldermen from the south and west sides especially have been like really forceful, and in a lot of cases have been leaders in sort of advocating for that kind of change. In my novel, I mentioned a man named Oscar DePriest, who was the first Black alderman in Chicago's history, and he had just gotten elected when World War I was starting. So you sort of see that ball beginning to turn and build up the momentum that is going to lead to what we recognize today as like major points of civil rights change.
So Chris asked about the most interesting thing that made it into the book. What is something that like you had to, that bit of research that you left out and you're just like, damn it, I got to do something with that someday because it's such a good story.
Yeah, so let's go right to the Vice District, which was super interesting back then, because Chicago at various periods has sort of had like a little like Amsterdam on the wire, just like a little area where like we're just kind of not going to enforce laws in this and just see what happens. And like this is not in the book, but there were at various times up to 3 opium dens in Chicago just operating. And if you've read the book, one of my main characters is the madam of a brothel. There were many brothels that were open around that time in Chicago, sort of existing beside the law and with sort of wink and nod approval of people in power. But what's interesting to me is like how so many of these brothels at the time, and I know obviously sex work is very controversial, but how many of them were led by women, started by women, and how they became machines for power for women and machines for enrichment. The most famous brothel in Chicago's history was called the Everleigh Club. It existed right up until the point that my novel is starting, but it's estimated that the sisters who ran it in 2020 dollars made about 9 figures over the years, made about $100 million doing this. And this is a time, women did not get, it wasn't like, sure, come be a knee surgeon, come be a stockbroker, come be all these other jobs where you can build a nice life for yourself. They were tremendously excluded. But in the criminal world, the Amsterdam area, it was called the Levy District. Justice folks were sort of like, we're not playing when it comes to laws and what drugs you can't do and what you can't buy and sell. They were also sort of like not playing when it came to like, a woman can't be in charge. Well, we're not playing. So here, whatever, a woman could be in charge. This is not a place where we follow the rules. So something I touch on a little in the book, but I'd love to explore more was sort of that world of like, what happens when you don't follow we're not going to play by the rules here, but the rules are things like, women and black people can't be in charge. Well, here's a little space where for a time they could.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
You said that it normally takes you about a year to write a book, but Lake of Darkness took you about 3 years. So was that a function of all this research, or was it just that, I have this beautiful story I have to really, take my time with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think there's no general agreement on how quickly writers should write. And I don't know what you guys find, but I find like when I go to Manhattan and I hang out with my literary writer friends and I'm like, I write about a book a year. They'll be like, whoa, like a book, it's not a race. Like, what's wrong with you? Doesn't it be good if you only took a year to do it? And then I'll go to like the Horror Writers Association annual dinner or something. And I'm sitting at tables with guys and gals who write like 2, 3, sometimes 4 books a year. And they're like, well, I mean, if one is the best you can do, don't be hard on yourself,
Slouch.
So I mean, I don't really know why this one took longer, except that, I did do a lot of research and, I was thinking of, the what later became like the meeting with my book publicist about like the American Dirt controversy. But like, I am a white guy writing about black characters in a black neighborhood in Chicago. So like, I want to make sure that everything I say and talk about is accurate and is supported. And I'm not making up terms or things that didn't happen. So I stand by my research on this book because I did so much of it. So maybe that was part of it too. I don't know.
The novel is kind of described as a cosmic horror.
Yeah.
All right. So can you explain what cosmic horror is?
Actually, I think I can, or I hope I can.
I hope you can.
Do it. Do it.
So for me, good cosmic horror is about main character realizing that he or she has been very, very wrong about something they were very, very sure about. That was huge.
Okay.
And if you cut right to the chase, you look at Lovecraft, you look at Ramsey Campbell, you look at all the people who do it. You're wrong about things like, I'm very, very sure that humans are the most evolved animal that's ever existed, and very, very nothing has ever developed the technology that humans could. And I'm very, very sure that evolution has culminated in us. So we must be the tip of the pyramid. And when you go to the South Pole and you discover the mountains of madness and this whole technology that is now becoming unearthed, and you slowly realize, like, wow, there seems to be evidence that there was another culture here before us that could do science things that we couldn't do. What does that say about our place? And maybe we were really wrong about how important we are.
Okay.
Maybe our opinion of ourselves is way too high. And I think it is that brush with like existential meaninglessness sort of that attracts me to it. And I think that's why so much of cosmic horror ends with a person going insane or killing themselves, or in the case of my main character in my book, like really, really wanting to forget. Like I really, really wish I did not know what I found out during the course of this adventure, because it really sucks.
Does the horror part match with what we what most people commonly think of horror? I mean, or is it the horror of the sudden realization? I mean, is horror the same term in the traditional sense as well as in yours?
I mean, I think that's a great question. All I can tell you is personally, I try to be, and I think I am sort of like a big tent horror guy. Like I like all varieties and flavors. But I think the sort of horror movie format where like you create likable characters and then you put them in danger. You create likable characters and then here comes Freddy or Jason or a tiger or a zombie.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods? What?
Well, that's
With a
its
golf
own
club.
kind of cosmic horror. But I think you have to say that's just different than one of H.P. Lovecraft's characters, realizing something or noticing something that shatters his mind at the end of the story. And I also think that's why it's so hard to film cosmic horror because the main character sort of doesn't matter. And like whether the main character lives or dies, like that's not what's interesting about this. What's interesting is what we discovered. So the main character is sort of just an eyeball that is
so
there.
Not the happy ending that you like to see in most wrap-ups.
Right. Like I'm always talking about how I think it's an interesting like inversion or perversion of like the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. How like the hero is plucked out of anonymity and he discovers there's something special about him. He goes to this special other world where he's tested and he learns something. But in the hero's journey, he comes back from this other world and like, wow, you're a Jedi now, Luke, or you're a wizard now, Harry. But you come back from, Lovecraft's world and it's like, wow, now I have to kill myself or check into an insane asylum. It's what I know cannot be contained in a brain.
Got it.
So this journey into this book, as most writers are never idle. So what's next on the horizon? What's your next project?
Yeah, so I for the first time I'm doing space horror and I love it. It's very exciting. So stuff like Philip K. Dick's A Maze of Death or the Alien films or Event Horizon, but something about the claustrophobic nature of outer space, sort of pinned with like we're also, as we are confined, we are faced with complete vastness and discovering new things that no one has seen before. And yet we're serving aboard the submarine at the same time. So I like how there's both kinds of that. So I'm slowly beginning to outline, have a couple thousand words on my next project, which will be space horror.
So I would imagine Aliens is probably a kind of a bedrock of that sort of.
Yeah, Dan O'Bannon, I just love. He wrote the screenplay to Alien, and then he did my favorite zombie movie of all time, Return of the Living Dead. So he's just one of my heroes.
Nice.
When you're as you're approaching that though, are you a strict outliner, or you're like, hey, this is the grand theme, let me just write this damn thing?
Yeah, so I definitely vacillate. So a lot of writers are able to say like, I plan everything in advance and here's my Excel spreadsheet with, and other writers are like, I just want to discover it as I'm writing. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I go back and forth. I think not least just because I can be a little forgetful. I'll take notes a lot, but I'll go through periods where I'll just feel like I don't need to look at those notes at all. And then I'll think, all right, maybe we need to go back. What was this character's mother's first name and where did I go back
Tighten it up. Yeah.
How about you guys? Do you guys like to plot in advance?
Yeah, I find I do the exact same thing that you do. I generally have an idea of the beginning and the end. Not general. I know what the beginning and the end are, and the middle is kind of muddled. And I'll write notes out, but then as I'm writing the story, I'll find that it just really doesn't. It's gone this way, and so those notes I wrote for chapters 20, whatever, I get thrown out.
Yeah, I've tried hardcore outlining and everything. I just find myself completely veering off the road within about 20 feet. So I know point of view, I know about what we're trying to accomplish in this chapter, and then I let it rip. So that's definitely
I go the way I did it as a screenwriter. I write out story beats. It's not really, it's kind of an outline, but it's more, I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. And that's probably, I would guess, 60% of the story in it is represented by those beats, and then the other 40% is kind of a discovery along the way. So
very relatable, all of this.
The way it
You're,
is,
you're
brother.
kind of ruining your reputation because you have this reputation as the voice of Midwest horror, and now you're going to go into space. So you're expanding your rep. They're going to have to say,
Well, maybe I need to be taken down a peg. They'll be like, "Hey, get back to Indiana and Iowa and Illinois."
I don't know. It sounds more fun up there.
no, I love the exploration that you're doing.
Yeah.
This Lake of Darkness it's historical fiction, it's noir, it's horror, and it's all of those things wrapped up in one. So I guess that's what
Pretty
cosmic
cool.
horror really is.
Got to read this in the dark at night.
Well, we want to thank Scott Kenemore for joining us on the Crew Capsule. Lake of Darkness is on sale now. Get out there and buy it.
Do
Buy his back catalog. He's got 5 other books you need to pick up. And if you're a
Look at
zombie
that.
fan,
Man, this prolific.
we've got something for you.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. This is awesome. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks,
Have a good
Scott.
one.
Hi, my name is Sean. Hi, my name
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
name is.
Are you ready, Michael?
Hi. This is the outro. And
Wait.
don't tell
Are you
me.
ready?
Don't,
Okay.
don't tell me to wait.
Here we go.
All right. Go.